For 50 years, Japan told itself a story, and the story was true right up until it was not. The story said, "We are the country that solved the earthquake. Our buildings bend where others break. Our engineers write the strictest codes on earth. Our trains stop themselves. Our cities are drilled and ready. And when the ground finally comes for us, we will be standing when it is over." In January of 1995, the elevated expressway through Kobe was one of the monuments to that story, a river of concrete on great round legs, carrying 40,000 cars a day above a city of 1.5 million people. It had been built, everyone understood, to survive anything. The whole country ran on that kind of confidence. The bullet trains carried sensors that would slam the brakes at the first tremor. School children folded under their desks every autumn on drill day in a choreography their parents had learned before them. Preparedness was not a policy in Japan. It was closer to a national manner, and it had been earned one terrible lesson at a time over a century of shaking ground. At 14 minutes to 6 on the morning of January 17th, the city beneath the expressway was still asleep. It was a Tuesday, and it was cold. Fishermen were walking down to the docks of one of the busiest ports in the world. Bakers had their ovens warming. The first commuter trains of the morning were still nearly empty, rolling through the dark with a handful of night workers. An hour later, they would have been packed shoulder to shoulder, and the highways full, and the arithmetic of that morning would have come out very differently. Kobe was unlucky in almost everything that day except the clock. In the wooden neighborhoods on the west side of town, kerosene stoves were burning in the small hours, while whole families slept under heavy tile roofs that had stood since their grandparents' time. Nobody in those houses had any reason to believe anything was wrong. The houses were not the mistake. The map was. Japan watched its earthquakes the way a country watches a border. It put the guards where the enemy had come from before. The science of the day pointed at Tokyo and at the coast southwest of it, and that is where the drills were run, and the budgets went, and the warnings were printed. Western Japan, the old merchant coast around Osaka, and Kobe was the quiet region. The maps drew it in calm colors. A fault line ran beneath an island in the bay a few miles from downtown Kobe, and almost nobody was watching it because it had not moved in living memory, and the story said the danger lived somewhere else. At 5:46, the fault moved. Not far away, not deep, but directly underneath, a shallow rupture a few miles beneath the streets. The shaking lasted about 20 seconds. People who lived through it describe being thrown, not shaken. Floors that punched upward, furniture that crossed rooms, a sound like the city itself clearing its throat. 20 seconds. About the time it takes to say a short paragraph aloud. When it stopped, the sixth largest city in Japan was dark, and the story of the country that solved the earthquake had 20 seconds worth of holes in it. The elevated expressway was lying on its side. More than 600 meters of it had gone over together. The great round legs snapped through, the deck resting against the buildings beside it, like a shelf that had been tipped. A bus hung off the broken edge with its front wheels in the air. The pictures went around the world before breakfast, and they hit with a particular force, because this was not a bridge in a poor country cutting corners. This was the monument itself. The road that could survive anything was in the street. The engineers would find the answer quickly, because the answer was already written down. The expressway's legs had been designed in the 60s to the codes of the 60s, with too little steel threaded through the concrete for a blow like this one. In 1981, Japan had rewritten its building code, and the rewrite worked. Almost everything built to the new standard bent, groaned, cracked, and stood. What fell was the older Japan, the office towers from the boom years, the mid-rise blocks with soft first stories, and above all the wooden houses under their beautiful heavy roofs, tens of thousands of them, which folded flat onto the people sleeping inside. Most of the dead never saw daylight that morning. They were gone in the first minutes, under their own homes, in the neighborhoods the new code had never reached. Then, while the dust was still settling, the second disaster arrived. Fire. Toppled stoves and torn gas lines lit the wooden districts, and the firefighters of Kobe did exactly what they had drilled to do. They ran to the hydrants, coupled their hoses, and opened the valves onto nothing. The water mains had broken in the same 20 seconds as everything else. Crews stood in full gear in front of burning blocks, holding dry hoses, and Nagata burned through the morning like a city from an older century. It was a working ward, the old center of the city's shoemaking trade, full of small workshops standing wall to wall with the houses, glue and rubber and timber stacked together. And once it caught, there was nothing gentle about how it went. Whole blocks burned to their foundations, with the hydrants dry beside them, and there was very little anyone could do but carry people away from the heat. The people did not wait for help to arrive. Neighbors dug for neighbors with jacks and bare hands, listened for voices under the tiles, formed lines to pass the injured out over the rubble. Most of the people pulled out of the ruins alive that day were pulled out by the people who lived next door. The rescue of Kobe began as a neighborhood effort, in slippers, in the cold, and for most of that first morning, the neighborhood was on its own, because the country was arguing with itself over who was in charge. In Tokyo, the scale of it came through slowly and secondhand. In the prefecture, the governor held the one authority that mattered, the formal request that sends the military into a disaster, and the request did not go out until 10 in the morning, more than 4 hours after the city fell down. Some of the delay was broken phones and broken roads. Some of it was older and stranger than that, a country still deeply careful about ordering soldiers into its own streets, hesitating on the worst morning it had had in 50 years. Help was offered from abroad and answered slowly or politely declined while the fires were still burning. The systems all existed. What was missing was the reflex, because the reflex had never been drilled, because the story said this could not happen here. The numbers, when they stopped moving, ended the story for good. More than 6,000 people were dead. Some 40,000 were hurt. 300,000 were homeless in January, sleeping in school gymnasiums and parks, queuing in the cold with kettles at water trucks, warming their hands at trash fires in front of what had been their streets. The port that had made the city rich, one of the busiest on earth, was a field of tilted cranes and drowned containers, its piers heaved sideways by the same liquefied ground that had swallowed whole quaysides. Families spent that first week finding out who was alive with handwritten lists taped to gymnasium doors, reading down the columns of names with their gloves still on, in a country that had considered itself the best prepared on earth. The damage came to about 10 trillion yen, a hole the size of a national budget, the costliest natural disaster any country had suffered to that day. And into that failure walked something the country did not expect. More than 1 million ordinary volunteers, students and retirees and salarymen with vacation days, who came from all over Japan to cook and carry and rebuild. The state had stumbled, and the public simply went around it, in what remains one of the largest spontaneous mobilizations in Japan's modern history. The Japanese still speak of 1995 as the year volunteering began. what Kobe changed, it changed permanently. The response failure was taken apart in public, and the machinery was rebuilt. Clear authority, standing plans, a military that now moves in hours, not days. New hospitals and city halls went up on rubber and steel isolation bearings, buildings designed to float over the shaking rather than fight it. An idea that went from exotic to standard in a single decade. The retrofit of the older Japan began in earnest. The bridge piers wrapped in steel jackets, the wooden schools rebuilt, the old expressway raised again on legs designed against the earthquake that had actually happened rather than the one that had been expected. The hazard maps were redrawn with humility in them, and the lesson traveled. Engineers on every continent studied the pictures of the fallen expressway, and codes far from Japan carry Kobe inside them today. The city itself was largely rebuilt within 5 years, faster than almost anyone had predicted, and it remembers what it paid. Every year on the morning of January 17th, before dawn, the survivors gather in a downtown park and light thousands of bamboo lanterns, and at exactly 5:46, the city goes quiet for the length of the shaking. 20 seconds is a long time when 100,000 people are keeping it together. 60 years of confidence had taken 20 seconds to break, and the breaking, in the end, is what the modern system is built on. In the summer of 2026, the ground moved again, in Kumamoto, in Japan's southwest. Buildings died there, and people died there, and it was a hard week. But the military moved the same day. The shelters opened by nightfall, and the newer city stood while pieces of the older one failed. Because every earthquake since has been answered by the one that broke the myth. Japan had not been wrong about engineering. It had been wrong about where to aim it. And at 5:45 on a winter morning, the ground picked the one city nobody was watching and filed the correction itself. The proof had been on paper all along, filed and public, and gathering dust in the one country that studies its earthquakes hardest. The strict code was written years before the earthquake. The quiet fault was resting on the geologists' shelves, and the hazard maps had been drawn and redrawn, with Kobe sitting in the calm colors, year after year. But the post-mortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.